So here's a story. A little boy is growing up with his mother. No father. Father is away at war. And the little boy grows into his masculinity as the only man in his family. He grows into the role of being the man of his family. And then when he's 5 years old, 6 years old, his father comes home from the war and reasserts his adult masculine authority, his pre-established dominance in the relationship, his pre-established romance with mom that includes a kind of intimacy that you've never seen from mom before. Not that you're actually seeing anything, one may hope. But you had been the man of the family and the only man of the family, and now that role has been usurped by an interloper. This is not Oedipus Rex, this is Oedipus Rocks. This is the story of rock and roll. And if you want to dispute that, I refer you to the lyrics of The End by Jim Morrison of The Doors. Jim Morrison is Oedipus Rex as told by a kid suffering from the teenage angst of growing up underfathered. And this is an idea that I've been thinking about a lot lately. I wish I could tell you that my thoughts are wholly comprehensive, but they're not. This is the Church of Splendor, and part of the splendor for me is thinking out loud in public. So today we're going to talk about what it means to be underfathered. That's an interesting story, isn't it? The story of the little kid who is usurped by his father, a little boy who is usurped by his father and then gets to spend a very long time resenting it. This is the actual story of the life of Jim Morrison. His father was a military officer, and Morrison got to grow up under his daddy's thumb and hating it. He had been a strong, young, independent young man, taking care of business at the age of 5, not really understanding what he didn't know, but understanding what he did know and what he was taking care of in a very manly way. All of these little boys, I will talk more about these little boys, there are a lot of them, but all of them living up to their responsibilities in a very manly way, and then all of a sudden they're kicked to the curb. You're back to being a kid. You had been, in your opinion, you had been an adult. And now you're back to being a kid. And it rankles. I introduce you to Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, as written by the man known as William Shakespeare. And the reason I say the man that we know by the name William Shakespeare is because another guy who lived basically the same story as Hamlet was a man by the name of Edward de Vere, the Earl of Oxford, who is the prime candidate other than the glovemaker's son from Stratford-upon-Avon to be regarded as being the author of the works of Shakespeare. But de Vere was born to his father, the Earl of Oxford, and then immediately shunted off to a surrogate family. He was raised by surrogates who acted like his parents to him, in no way of making the distinction that Children may or may not smell right to their parents. This is one of the claims that we make when we get to reductionist biology. But children have no idea when they're being brought up. They have no idea if the people bringing them up are their parents or not. This is one of the things that goes into the original story of Oedipus Rex, is that Oedipus was raised by people who were not his parents and didn't know it. Didn't know they were not his parents, and in not knowing it, that led to subsequent tragedies. If you're not familiar with this play, this is Sophocles. If you're not familiar with it, you should become familiar with it. It is cornerstone of the Western canon. It is absolutely essential for understanding all of tragedy. You can understand all of tragedy through Oedipus Rex, that one play. How tragedy is constructed and how the moral fault of the actor is absolutely necessary for understanding the ultimate tragedy. But De Vere was raised by surrogates, taken occasionally to see his real parents with some pageantry and plausibly incomplete understanding on the little boy's part. And then at 8, he's shipped off to Cambridge, essentially to university. He's 8 years old. And then when he's 12, his biological father dies, and he's shipped off to the home of Lord Cecil, the factotum for Queen Elizabeth, the vice president in charge of everything else. Toady, minion, rent seeker, power seeker, hanger on. He's Polonius in Hamlet. That's how much De Vere liked him. He's Polonius. But we have all these transitions. People he thinks are his parents who aren't his parents. Death of his parents. All of these transitions. When I say the word transition in the context of family life, what I'm talking about is absolutely akin to adding or removing a dog from a pack of dogs. If you have more than one dog, you're familiar with pack behavior and pack dominance, how dogs sort themselves in packs. And when you add or remove a dog, the immediate change seems simple and easy, that you add a dog and the dogs work it out, and they kind of work it out immediately. Within a couple of hours, everything seems kind of settled. But if you're really paying attention, it takes weeks to work out. Sometimes it never works out, that you will add a dog and 2 dogs in your family will be anathematical to each other, will never get along, and they will never integrate well into that pack. The pack will find a way to make it work anyway. This is the way dogs work, but may never fit in. Adding or removing a dog from a pack is a transition. Changing a child's home, changing a child's parents, one or the other, adding or removing a parent, adding or removing children, adding or removing step-parents or stepchildren. All of these things are transitions in the life of a child, and every one of them introduces chaos into that child's life. A few weeks ago, I talked about the idea that every family is a fishbowl, and the children grow up not knowing that the water that they swim in is really just kind of an isolated local example. They grow up in a little fishbowl thinking it's the whole ocean. But children don't notice the water they're swimming in until something changes. And a transition is where something changes. And when you think, oh, moving to an apartment, that's a new apartment, that's an adventure. Moving to a new city, wow, that's a real thrill. That's a whole new chapter in my life. Marriage, God, it's I never anticipated doing this, but now that we're doing it, it just seems so challenging and such a breathtaking change in the scope of the responsibilities that I'm willing to take. These are all adult evaluations of change. These are not evaluations that children make. Children are amazingly conservative, unbelievably conservative. Where conservative means resistant to change. That's what conservative really means, is conserve what's here, don't replace it. The Latin word for revolution is noe rei, new things. New things is revolution. Children don't like new things. Children like stability. They like things to be the way they are. So, De Vere's life, these are your parents, no, 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 now you're going to school, and now your father's dead, and now this guy is your parent, and he's really a dipshit. Looking for a sullen, resentful teenager? A sullen, resentful teenager who can't shut up about how sullen and how resentful he is? Don't look to Hamlet, look to De Vere. Or look to Jimi Hendrix, who lived almost exactly the same life, that he's born to people who immediately ship him off to live with other people, and then they pull him back, and then they ship him off again, and then they pull him back, and then they ship him off again. And I'm telling you that the greatest musical genius of the 20th century, grew up in a life of chaos, exactly like the 17th Earl of Oxford. Is that amazing? Exactly like Hamlet, the Dane, Prince of Denmark. And I can draw another connection because guess what? John Lennon lived exactly the same life. Married to an adult baby mother, adult baby father. Adult baby father is away in the Merchant Marine or whatever during World War II. Comes back, tries to assert himself. Mom tries to reassert herself. Both of them fail, and they shunt him off with an aunt. And that's how he grew up. It's the life of De Vere. It's the life of Jimi Hendrix. Paul McCartney's life was similar, not exactly the same, but very similar. And again, death of a parent in the teen years. The important age for children, I talk about this all the time, the age of conceptual fluency, when children wake up in father tongue. A child, I talk about this in chapter 3 in Man Alive, and that's where you should go to read about it because I'm going to summarize it here. It will not be comprehensive. But when a child seems so chatty at the age of 3, and you think you're really conversing with a human being, but you're not. You're engaged in signal processing exercise with an exceptionally talented pattern matching mammal. The child is doing with words exactly what my dog Dusty is doing when I slap my ass vigorously 5 times, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like that. I won't do it right now because it'll make him nuts. I slap my ass 5 times just like that, and Dusty saunters towards the door because he knows he's going outside to pee. I'm communicating with him by signal processing. Indeed, by a totally false proxy of a cargo cult, from my point of view, that's what it is. It's a completely false proxy. My slapping myself on the ass has nothing to do with opening the door. And it's a cargo cult in the sense that Dusty is connecting the event of me slapping me on my ass with the worshipful prospect of having the door open so he can go outside and pee and long to chase rabbits and bark at birds. And that is what a 2-year-old, 3-year-old child is doing. When you're conversing with that child, you're not really engaged in conversation. You're engaged in a signal processing transaction. You're trading signals that the child already understands, and the child is responding with signals that he thinks you already understand. But it really is akin to babble. And you can tell the difference when the child wakes up. Because as soon as the child wakes up, suddenly you will be in conversation with a human being. It will surprise you at first. It's wonderful. I love this. I love this age. 4 years old, 4 and a half, 5 years old, really 5 and a half at the latest. If a child gets to 6 without hitting this point, I start to worry. But the child wakes up in father tongue. And all of a sudden you're dealing with an individual human being, small, weak, inexperienced, but fully capable of reasoning about facts and evidence and reasoning about facts that are not in evidence, engaging in subjunctive postulation about worlds not in evidence in order to draw conclusions that are not obvious, that would never be obvious to any mere mammal, but can only be processed by ratiocination within the thinking brain, within the big brain up front, the brain that other mammals don't have. But if there is a really lousy time to have transitions happening in a child's life, that's it. 4 years old, 5 years old, 6 years old. Horrible, horrible time for transitions to be happening in a child's life, because that's the way that the child is waking up as a human being. That's when the child is drawing conclusions about the world outside his mind on the basis of almost no experience. And these conclusions, which can be hugely erroneous, will ride around in that child's brain for the rest of his life. There's no good time for divorce. There's no good time to break up a marriage. There is no good time to rob a child of his father or his mother, his brothers or his sisters, his grandparents, aunts and uncles, cousins. There is no good time to rob a child of his family. But if you're going to rob your child of his family, do it before he's 3 or after he's 18, not in between. And especially not at the age of conceptual fluency, 4, 5, and 6. Do not do it then, because wrecking that child's life. You were destroying that child's life. You were undermining his confidence in the security and stability of the entire universe. This is a viciously cruel thing to do, and guess what? It happened to lots and lots of people. Obviously, it happens all the time. If you're paying attention, you watch it happen all the time, because when do marriages fall apart? When children get difficult. That it's been falling apart for years, but it's just gotten to the good part of falling apart just at the point where the children really start to get difficult, where the job changes from primarily nurturance to primarily cultivation. Nurturance is a maintenance job that ideally you are working very hard to teach your children to do on their own, and you want them to take on more and more responsibility for their own self-nurturance every day. And ideally, that job is nearing completion by age 5, that the child is getting out of bed on his own, is taking his own bath, is, using a bathroom on his own, brushing his own teeth, picking out his own clothes, putting on his own clothes, taking a whole lot of responsibility around the house, and gradually more and more and more. And this is what the nurturant job is to take care of the ordinary day-to-day maintenance of that child, and to gradually instruct him in the art of doing it himself. But it's the age of conceptual fluency that cultivation becomes particularly important, because that's the age at which it is possible to cultivate the mind of a child. I mean, obviously you're working to cultivate the child's body, and this is a big part of a father's job, is to provide the environment in which the child is to be cultivated and to be nurtured. But a father's real job begins 4, 5, 6 at the age of conceptual fluency, at the age that the child is now ready to receive moral instruction, to receive abstract instruction about the way to live, not simply remonstrances for bad behavior or minor punishments for infractions, but to understand conceptually why one should behave in certain ways and should not behave in other ways. And this responsibility falls primarily to the father, and if the father is absent from the home or is emotionally absent from his family, then it won't happen. This is where adult babies actually come from. Adult babies are born at age 0, and adult babies are born at age 5. Through being underfathered, being lacking a father entirely, maybe lacking all positive male role models, or having a father who is theoretically, hypothetically present, is a mirage of a father, and yet is not living up to his responsibilities as a father. In particular, is not living up to his responsibilities to provide for the appropriate moral instruction for his children, and in consequence, these children take forever to grow up. Children who are underfathered at the age of 5, at the age of 4, at the age of 5, at the age of 6, children who are underfathered at that particular age take a long, long, long time to grow up. And these Oedipal stories of rock and rollers are very, very interesting, because it's exactly the opposite story, that the child really was doing his best to grow into an adult role far before he ever should have done it. Much too young to take on that responsibility, and this is the adult baby nature of these boys' mothers. We know that their mothers were adult babies because they never should have let them take on that kind of responsibility. They never should have led them to the illusion that they were the man of the family, because they're much too young for that kind of responsibility. It is totally inappropriate for a child of 4 or 5 or 6 to take on the responsibility of being the man of his family. He can't possibly deliver on that kind of promise, because he doesn't know what he's up against. He doesn't know what the job entails. And so it was very wrong for these mothers to permit their sons to engage in this Oedipal behavior, this stepping in to fill the gap left by the absent father. But then to have the rug pulled them out from under them at exactly the wrong age, 4, 5, 6 years old, is when Dad came home from the war. From 1964 to 1969 or so, these guys dominated the radio. These were men born 1939, 1940, 1941, 1942. This is rock and roll. That you distinguish the rhythm and blues and sock hop sound of the 50s. You distinguish the later country rock sound brought to us by the band and the Reformed Birds, Creedence Clearwater Revival, these guys were all born in 43 and 44. No kidding. But that rock sound, that urban rhythm and blues sound, the Motown sound, that was all brought to us by boys born 39, 40, 41, 42, whose fathers fought in World War II. This was Oedipus Rex was brought to us by Oedipus Rex. The idea of Underfathered is a huge moment to me because I think it explains everything. I think it explains everything in the failure of the West. The West, as I've discussed, was created by fatherhood. It was created by the hoplite Greeks defending their freeholds of land, defending their wives, defending their family, defending their families, defending their livestock, their farms, their physical plant, their productive capacity, and doing it by means of making and maintaining their own weapons of war. These were very warlike people who fought when they had to, fought side by side, fought as equals side by side, invented the phalanx formation, dominated Mediterranean history for thousands of years. Not just by the Greeks, but later by the Romans. That style of warfare, invented by hoplite Greeks, and they invented that style of warfare in order to defend their own independence. This is an extremely independent people. This is the birth of Western civilization, is these guys, not Socrates, not Plato, not Aristotle, not all of the famous politicians that we remember from Greek history, not even Leonidas. Leonidas is a sine qua non. Without Leonidas, I wouldn't be here, you wouldn't be here. Arguably, all of the stuff of modernity wouldn't be here. That Leonidas saved us from savagery, saved us maybe from eternal savagery, maybe from turning back the clock on human progress right at that point. The assertion of Persian authority over the Hellas at that time would have been a disaster for human civilization. And instead, Hellenic civilization survives to this very day in kind of a muted and crippled form. And the way that it's been muted and crippled has been in the form of unfatherhood, disfatherhood, of robbing the father of his utterly essential importance. Not just in the family, but the father's role in the family is what creates all of the rest of human civilization, but even more than that, of a livable human life, of a human life that is worth living. And one of the elements of Greek tragedy, certainly in Sophocles, it's all through Sophocles and through Aeschylus too, is the idea that no man is happy until he's dead. No man is happy until he's dead. Well, how absurd is that? The only way for you to be happy is to be, as far as you know, deprived of all future opportunities for happiness. This is absurd. This is an absurd proposition that is understood, easy to understand from the point of view of people who really did live very tragic lives. They lived lives that were solitary, mean, nasty, brutish, and short. Riven with diseases, with plagues. The story in Oedipus Rex starts with a plague. Died too young and in really horrible ways. I could see how they might infer that. Again, we're talking about inferences that bear no relationship to fact, because happiness and death have nothing to do with each other. To the contrary, that death makes happiness impossible. It couldn't possibly be the case that you could only be happy by being dead. This is obviously an incorrect evaluation, but you got to do something more than that to come up with a better argument. The hoplite argument is the good one, but it was never defended philosophically, and the tragic argument has always been defended philosophically, and it's the one that obtains for virtually everyone. This is the underlying philosophy, underlying everything that you think, more than likely, is very similar to Greek tragedy, that your best happiness comes with death. Certainly that's the argument in heaven, is that your best happiness comes with death. That Life is a trial you must endure in order to get to the good part. But you can't take your own life because that would be cheating. I mean, really, seriously, if you actually believe that, if you believe that the life after death is going to be infinitely better than the one you're living now, why wouldn't you immediately do yourself in? Because you don't believe it, that's why. Obviously, the theology will protect you from having to defend yourself in that question by insisting that self-slaughter is a sin, the worst of all sins, because the only way you can deserve your ice cream is to eat your peas. You got to eat all your damn peas, every last piece, 78 peas, 95 peas, 112 peas. You don't eat them all, no ice cream for you. That's a dumbass argument, but so are all the others. If you go and read mythological arguments at the most basic level, I mean, you pull the lens way back and just read the briefest summaries, and you read the same stories over and over again. The details make the stories different, but the stories are all the same. And that's why it's interesting to me to point out that Oedipus, Hamlet, De Vere, Jimi Hendrix, John Lennon, same childhood. Same screwed up childhood, and we know all these guys' names. They worked real hard to make up for what they were missing from their fathers. Worked very hard to father themselves, and they worked very hard to demonstrate to the fathers that they really never got to meet or know. They worked very hard to demonstrate to those fathers that they were worthwhile men. This is not a horrible thing. I mean, I talk all the time about ugly motivations that result in beautiful, wonderful things. That kind of father hunger often results in beautiful, wonderful things. It results in men who work very, very hard to produce really amazing things, like the men we're talking about. I'll give you another one. Richard Dawkins was in the news this week for advocating the abortion of Down syndrome babies. And no doubt I'm being unfair to him, and I've never read the man, and I doubt I ever will. I don't have any interest in popularizers of science. I think they're in the mystification business. They're in the let me astound you with something you never thought of before. If you watch the Discovery Channel, you'll find the breathless stupidity of popular science books condensed into a half-hour script so you can hear how stupid it is and how manipulative it is, how all of this crap is manipulating you into insulting your own mind and insulting your own efficacy to manage your own existence, because there are so many mysteries in the universe that you can't understand. You might as well sit on your thumb and watch television and read bad books forever. Popular entertainment in general is in the business of selling you back your own misery, because as long as they can sell you back your own misery, there's no threat that you'll buy a better product. You'll keep buying that product over and over again. Once you become addicted to your own misery, there's nothing quite the same. But anyway, Dawkins got himself in a world of shit by advocating the abortion of Down syndrome babies, which of course is monstrous, and reductionist scientists often are monstrous. I know almost nothing about Dawkins, and I can tell right away that he's INTJ, high C, low I. Maybe by now, high I, low C. The man is certainly in love with his fame, and so he may just be all C. Definitely INTJ, couldn't do the job he's in without being an INTJ, that this is the echo chamber of academia, and why everything that academics say should be taken, say a boulder or two of salt, because they're all INTJs, high Cs, and they talk to nobody but each other. They have no idea what the rest of the world is like. If you want to know what the inside of a classroom or a laboratory is like, trust the reporting of an INTJ, high C academic. If you want to know what anything else is like, including the grounds right outside that building, you need to talk to somebody else. Ideally a high D, because high Ds will see everything the high Cs miss. But in any case, he wrote a subsequent defense of his pig-headed pronouncement, and I'll read a portion of that. He said, if your morality is based, as mine is, on a desire to increase the sum of happiness, I want to stop right there and point out to you that the sum of happiness means nothing. Happiness is particular to an individual. It cannot be counted into a sum. An individual is either happy or not. You probably can't say too well from the outside. You can only see external secondary consequences that could be false proxies. The individual can self-report his own happiness, and that can be a lie, and you really have no way of knowing if someone is happy or not, except by long experience with that person, really, is getting to know the person is how you'll know one way or another if the person is happy. And what they say in any individual moment is very likely to be deceiving, if not actually deceptive. It's likely to be misleading. But in any case, happiness can't be summed. It isn't a collective property. It's a property only of individuals. So I'm going to say, he's going to say, and reduce suffering, and I'll make the same objection. Suffering is only a property of individuals. There is no collective suffering. It's not something that can be reduced from the outside. That physical suffering, as in the case of an injury or something like that, can be palliated from the outside, but internal emotional suffering cannot be addressed from the outside, except, again, indirectly, and you can't say for sure if it's there or if it isn't, or if you've done anything to ameliorate or cure it. These are all absurd propositions. He's not only talking about worlds that are not in evidence, he's talking about worlds that cannot ever be in evidence, cannot possibly exist. He is making subjunctive postulations about a world that cannot exist in order to dictate terms and conditions to the world that does exist. So let's go back. We'll start over. I'll read from the start. If your morality is based, as is mine, on a desire to increase the sum of happiness and reduce suffering, the decision to deliberately give birth to a down baby, can't get any further down on the screen, I gotta bring it up. When you have the choice to abort it early in the pregnancy, might actually be immoral from the point of view, wait for this, from the point of view of the child's own welfare. Richard Dawkins says organisms want to die. Richard Dawkins, a famous ethologist. I don't know what ethologists do except opine on the sorting order of animals, the pecking order of chickens and dogs. But he's a famous ethologist and an evolutionary biologist, and the man is certainly accomplished, and I deny him nothing in his accomplishments, except that he's making a claim that cannot possibly be true. There is no such thing as a living organism that wants to die, except possibly human beings when they're very old, very sick, or very miserable. This is the only time that you will ever find an organism that wants to die, because the only organism that can conceive of its own death is us. No other animal, no other organism can conceive of its death, and no other organism will, by plan and intent, by teleological purpose, pursue its own death. We like to make arguments about lemmings, but an evolutionary biologist can tell you for sure that lemmings are just doing what lemmings do. They're not choosing to commit suicide. They have no knowledge of suicide. Suicide means to murder oneself. That's what it means. It is a reflexive idea, and the idea of killing. It's to kill oneself. And in order to kill oneself, you have to know what it is. You could say that an animal is capable of acting volitionally, acting willfully in ways that will result in its slaughter, as with bears eating from garbage cans. But you can't say that the animal foresees its own death and is pursuing its death, because the animal is incapable of foreseeing its death. It's incapable of pursuing any abstract goal, and it is incapable of understanding that it is in fact a self capable not just of death, not just capable of extermination, but capable of auto-extermination, capable of killing itself. It's not able to do any of those things. Only human beings can do that. But in any case, it is nevertheless the case that every organism wants to live. Every organism will resist its slaughter, including the suicidal. The rarest case in the world would be somebody who was actually emotionally suicidal, and then you set about to strangle or smother that person, and they don't fight back. And that may just be the snake brain and the mammal brain fighting back. You may insist that the thinking brain still wants to die, and yet when you've got something blocking your trachea, this can happen. You vomit wrong, or you swallow something wrong, you've got something blocking your trachea, you will go through this gasping event. I wish I didn't know this. You will go through this gasping event that is really horrifyingly terrifying. It doesn't last very long, and really there are no consequences. There are no enduring consequences, but it is really frightening while it's happening. And frightening to your thinking brain, frightening to your mammal brain, and very frightening to your snake brain, which is managing everything. You have no control over what's happening right now. You are gasping, choking. You are trying to reopen your trachea. You're trying to get that blockage away from your trachea, and you are not doing any of this. When I say trying, I'm implying an abstract, intentional, willful, conceptual purpose. This is not true. This is your snake brain is entirely doing everything, and anything that you might be doing purposively is secondary, because your snake brain is managing that trachea, and it will not let you interfere, and it will not let anything else happen until it has regained control of your breathing apparatus. And my expectation would be that even if you were Robin Williams right at the point where you were ready to tie the belt around your neck, nevertheless, if I came after you and started choking you, you'd fight back. This is a property of all organisms. This is not news to anyone. This is news to no one. If you really have to discover this, please don't torture anything bigger than a beetle to find out that every living organism wants to be alive. And so for Dawkins to say that abortion of any child, not just a Downs child, but any child, or any kitten, or any dog, or any beetle, would be preferable to that organism, that organism, now alive, wants nothing more than to die, that organism says, yeah, balance, life is a Down syndrome kid, isn't all that good, maybe I'll just pass on this opportunity. Organisms don't do that. We don't suffer happiness, suffer suffering, or experience happiness collectively. There is no way to augment or reduce someone else's happiness, no matter how hard you try. I wrote about that yesterday on self-adoration. You can go look at it. There was absolutely no way for another person to cause your emotional state, no matter what you say. And therefore, that part of the argument is ridiculous. The argument that the child would prefer to be dead is obviously ridiculous. That I mean, it's just fucking stupid. And this is not making a mistake in Twitter. That's his original excuse, is that he was making a mistake in Twitter, and therefore you shouldn't hold him accountable because, dang, you only get 140 characters. No, he had a chance here to explain himself, and the way he explained himself is to demonstrate that he, alike unto Plato, alike unto Aristotle, alike unto Sophocles, alike unto Aeschylus, alike unto Shakespeare, De Vere, alike unto John Lennon, Richard Dawkins is completely ass backwards about ethics, about morality, about what is the purpose of ethical behavior and who is the moral actor. The moral actor in an abortion never recovers from it. You could say a high C could look at abortion and take account of all of the downstream costs, opportunity costs, potential losses, downstream tragic events, and maybe conclude that the abortion is the better choice. Nobody ever forgets killing a child. Nobody ever does. This is the universal experience of humanity. When you meet someone who says, abortion, best thing I ever did was an abortion, put your hand on your wallet. You're dealing with someone who cannot be trusted, who doesn't have the proper fathering, was so completely underfathered as a child that the capacity for moral reasoning was never developed, was never cultivated. That's what it means. But I'll tell you something interesting about Richard Dawkins. Two interesting things about Richard Dawkins. Number one, he was born in 1941, same as our rock stars. Number two, his dad was in the war, same as our rock stars. Did he have the same Oedipal problem as someone like John Lennon or Jim Morrison? The same Oedipal problems as De Vere and Jimi Hendrix? I don't know. The other interesting fact about the man's life is that he was religious, very religious into his adolescence, and then had a crisis of faith and became the atheist that we know today, the obnoxious, completely repellent, the atheist who's best at making sure that nobody else becomes an atheist is Richard Dawkins. He's better than all the others. All the other so-called four horsemen are similarly repellent. Christopher Hitchens is now the best of the bunch because he's taken up residence in the dirt where he can cause less harm. But Dawkins is the most obnoxious of the bunch, and the fact that he was a pious boy and is now a very publicly impious man, it suggests to me that he might be underfathered. When you see that kind of stuff, when you see somebody who's trying too hard, talking too loud, can't seem to pile up big enough accomplishments, this is father hunger. It's father hunger in Dawkins, it's father hunger in Jimi Hendrix, it's father hunger in Jim Morrison and John Lennon, it's father hunger in Hamlet, it's father hunger in Oedipus. It's the same story over and over again, the same story told over and over again. And the story is, these boys were underfathered. Now in the West, virtually all boys are underfathered. There are almost no hoplites left in the West. They never were all the fathers, but they used to be most of the fathers, and now they're almost none of the fathers. And all of the West is underfathered. And it is that underfathered state that is the cause of everything else that we lament and abhor in modern civilization. Why are we adult babies? Because none of us was ever fathered enough. That's a correctable nuisance. My name is Greg Swann. The Church of Splendor, among other purposes, exists to correct that defect. Future weeks, I'll be talking more about this because this could usually occupy the rest of my year. But I think the idea is fascinating. I think it's something that you could be looking for in your own explorations of the world around you, is to just take a look. Every time you research somebody, go look at that biography. Look at ages 0 to 6 and see what was going on in that child's life. Look again at the age of puberty, 13, 14, 12, 13, 14 years old. And then look again at the age that the child is going to be launched into life. So 15 to 25, that's a longer span of time. It depends on the particular individual. But the really decisive point is going to be 4, 5, and 6. What's going on in that kid's life at that time? If you see family photos, I'll tell you what they look like. He'll tell you what the boys look like. They look like this. Like that. Poker face, flat line of the mouth. You look at a 5-year-old boy, and you can tell everything that's going on in that family by his facial expression. And if he's wearing that face, that family is screwed up. He is an underfathered boy. He's telling you at age 5. He doesn't know it, but he's showing it anyway. He's signaling it anyway. When you see a kid who's really happy at that age, and one photograph won't be enough to establish that, but when you see a kid who's really coming along at that age, the kid's going to be a world beater at 15, and he's going to be really impressive at 25, and it's good odds he'll be very impressive at 75. And all of this requires the cultivation of the father. You can overcome some of it, and I encourage you to do it. You have to father yourself. I made a film for the 21 Convention, a video for the 21 Convention earlier this week about underfathering, the underfatherhood of Swann and the Swann cult. I'm being bugged by a cat. Not the usual cat. This is Onyx. He's another one. But you can be watching for this in your real life, and it's not going to be hard to see because it's ubiquitous, but when you're seeing adult baby behavior, when you're seeing the manifestations of adult babyhood, what you're seeing is unfatherhood. You're seeing unfathered children. And if you want to, at that point, you can go back and find it. You can find the transitions that resulted in this unfathered child who has now become an adult baby. It's true for you too, almost certainly. We're all going to fix ourselves, and we're going to fix ourselves together. Starting next Sunday. Bless you. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.